Hello and welcome. You're watching NewsX World. I'm Megha Sharma and let's take a look at the top stories of the hour. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky has once again emphasized on meeting with his Russian counterpart. He says he will meet Vladimir Putin anywhere except in Moscow. Russia has responded, naming Istanbul as the preferred venue for potential talks. A detainee has been killed and there are two others that are critically injured after a sniper opens fire at an ICE center in Dallas. US President Donald Trump condemns the shooting and has attributed it to the rising violence in what he called left-leaning Democrats. Heading to the United Nations, the Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has dismissed Palestinian recognition as shameful capitulation. This comes as over 150 countries recognize Palestine as a state. Yemen's Houthis have launched a drone attack on Israel's Eilat region, leaving at least 22 people wounded. While claiming the responsibility for the attack, Houthi military spokesperson said that this is the second such operation in the past 24 hours that has targeted Israel. After multiple drone attacks on Gaza-bound flotilla, Italian Prime Minister Giorgia Meloni has condemned the strikes. She has, however, criticized the flotilla mission as dangerous and irresponsible. Denmark says that it will strengthen its ability to detect and neutralize drones after two incidents this week led to airport closures. Justice Minister Peter Hammelgaard announced that the armed forces are seeking improved capabilities to handle drone threats. South Korea has said that North Korea has up to 2 tons of highly enriched uranium. This material, crucial for producing nuclear warheads, is reportedly being processed at 4 sites with uranium centrifuges still active. Apple is urging the European Union to repeal its landmark digital competition law, citing security risks and a worse consumer experience. In a formal submission, Apple is calling for a more suitable legislative framework to replace the Digital Markets Act. We begin with our special coverage of the United Nations General Assembly in New York. The United Nations is celebrating its 80th anniversary as the global community tries to navigate the various challenges facing our world today. Key items on the agenda include the wars being fought in the Middle East and Ukraine, as well as the serious challenges being posed by climate change. My correspondent Thomas Porteous is in New York to cover the general debate of the 80th session of the UNGA, and this is going to carry on up until 29th of September, and we got a chance to speak to him earlier in the day. Hello Thomas, and it's great to have you in New York, and if you could tell us, so what is on the agenda for the UNGA that is taking place currently?
Well, yes, of course, we have landed, and now it is the third day here in New York, where over 150 leaders are expected to gather in this building right in front of me. Technically the second day of debating, but of course here in the year of 2025 there are only a few things that are clearly on the top of the agenda. The first being the ongoing war in Gaza, a very visceral conflict in the Middle East, which has led to traditional Israeli allies recognizing a Palestinian state just on Monday. The likes of the United Kingdom, France and Belgium, all of which called a session on Monday and did exactly that, formally recognize the state of Palestine, much to the dismay of Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu, who vocally expressed discontent at the decision. There are expected to be calls from around the world, many of which call this war a genocide. The UN has not called it that yet, but we will of course hear a lot of heads of state address this crisis which is going on in the Middle East, and of course the UN's decision on how it will act on it moving forward. The second of which is the ongoing war in Ukraine. Russia's war has been going on since 2022 and still to no peace. President Donald Trump said that he would end the war in a single day. However, recent escalations, especially from the air in Eastern Europe, has meant that this has not happened. We expect to hear huge statements, particularly from countries in Eastern Europe, and of course those huge European powers that have been backing Ukraine throughout this entire conflict. Now, the third huge issue is, of course, the climate crisis. Now, under President Donald Trump, this has been hugely controversial. He has taken the US out of the Paris Climate Accord for the second time. And so countries who are most affected by climate change will surely be voicing their opinion on how to meet those targets and move forward green energy with such a loud voice like the United States being so strongly opposed to those green energy goals.
Right, absolutely. And, 2 days have already passed. The third day is going to also be a very interesting one, with important leaders from Palestine are going to be speaking at the UNGA. Most importantly, since Palestine has been sanctioned by the US president, therefore their leader is not going to be able to be present physically, but there is going to be a video conference. If you could shed light into what all has already happened at the UNGA general debate up until now.
So, as we have said, there has been many Western countries that have now recognized the state of Palestine in front of the United Nations. That happened on Monday, and which led onto Tuesday's session, which of course had Donald Trump seething, seemingly, in front of that podium in front of the United Nations General Assembly. A hugely controversial speech which Donald Trump delivered, several questionable remarks. And the first one of which was noticeable was that he slammed the institution he was delivering his speech to in a huge way. He questioned the point of the institution he was delivering his speech to, claiming to have stopped 7 wars himself, including that of India, Pakistan, Thailand, Cambodia, and other wars that some people would merely describe as skirmishes. Moving on, he also, of course, called climate change the biggest con of our time, a hugely scientifically proven fact. Donald Trump has been a huge advocate against green energy and a huge advocate for fossil fuels, and so this was more than expected, but not in the more direct tone that Donald Trump did strike it in. However, we could speak about Donald Trump's talk for hours, but we will move on. Volodymyr Zelensky, he spoke today. He once again rose his concerns about the power of the United Nations, and of course Russia's war is moving into its 4th year now, and there has been no end in sight for Ukraine entering its 4th year, and so he raised his alarms there. Of course, Iran's president spoke today. He said that Iran, in fact, is not developing a nuclear weapon, much like Israel's Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu says. There has been much controversy and, of course, a war over Iran's nuclear program. And so in order for Pezeshkian to get that stand and say that in front of all these world leaders, in fact, was a significant time for that to be delivered. And there will, of course, has been many other statements, that of Erdogan, that of Macron, all delivering speeches. But we will, of course, bring you all the up-to-date. Now we are live here in New York.
All right. Thomas is on the ground in New York, and he has also filed a ground report right in front of the United Nations headquarters, where the 80th session of the UNGA general debate is taking place. Have a look.
Now we're here at the United Nations General Assembly in New York, where leaders from 150 countries gather to push their agendas in front of one another. Now, it has been 80 years since this organization was founded and put forward here in New York. Now, there's a strong sense of urgency here, urgency and reflection, whether how this is going to be renewed, the United Nations, for the next 80 years. Now, many leaders have already being critical of this organization, one being President Donald Trump and one being President Zelensky, saying that this organization cannot and does not go far enough in this day and age. It was, after all, founded by those victorious powers of World War II 80 years ago. Now, what has already happened in this year's session? It was, of course, opened by Brazil, the traditional opener, with a huge speech by Lula da Silva, which pushed the climate agenda and slammed US President Donald Trump and his tariff policies. And also, of course, a huge talking point here, Israel's war in Gaza. Debatably, critically calling it a genocide. Hugely, and then going after the Ukraine war as well. Volodymyr Zelensky also warned the world today in front of the assembly that Ukraine was only the first target for Moscow, and called for stronger security guarantees, particularly from the United States and particularly from the whole United Nations, where he criticized the body as a whole. Another huge and notable guest to the United Nations and speaking in front of the Assembly today was Ahmed al-Shara, a man who would not have been here 1 year ago after Bashar al-Assad's regime fell in December of 2024. He demanded his sanctions were formally lifted by the United Nations. Now, another significant development that has happened here today is that the United Nations has announced plans for an independent scientific panel on artificial intelligence, a major step towards a new and unexpected world that we are going into of artificial intelligence. Now, what is yet to come? 2 days left of this huge meeting of leaders. So we still have the likes of Benjamin Netanyahu to take the stand, that of China and Russia, whose foreign ministers and vice president will be speaking in front of the General Assembly and pushing their national agenda forward. High stakes sideline meetings as well on climate, finance, Gaza ceasefire talks, as well as a possible joint initiative on global governance reform. We will, of course, keep you updated here on NewsX World when it comes to it all, here live from the ground in New York.
Moving on, the United Nations has addressed the incident involving U.S. President Donald Trump at the Central Assembly. According to the United Nations, the escalator may have been turned off after Trump's videographer accidentally tripped a safety switch while going up backwards ahead of the president. The UN also clarified that the teleprompter used during Trump's address was controlled exclusively by the White House. This comes after Trump raised allegations that the United Nations had interfered with his speech, suggesting that the equipment might have been tampered with an intention to embarrass him. The United Nations denied any intentional action, explaining that the incident was a simple accident involving the videographer. The president has been vocal about what he sees an obstruction during his public appearances, making this incident a new focus for his claims. The United Nations has emphasized that safety measures and technical controls are standard procedures and not targeted at any individual. Andrew Leung on the telecast with me. Andrew, how do you react to these allegations that have been made by U.S. President Donald Trump? Of course, the United Nations at this point of time responding, saying that, it was the White House that was managing Donald Trump's teleprompter when he was making that UNGA speech. And with regards to the escalator stopping midway, it may have been Trump's videographer who may have tripped the switch, stopping the escalator.
Well, forget about the teleprompter. I mean, this is really nothing. It's just a side issue. What was at stake in Trump's long speech and convoluted as it is the fact that the United Nations has proven to be highly ineffectual, and not because of its bureaucracy, although that, of course, accounts for a great deal of the lack of progress and the costs. But then the whole infrastructure has now outlived its usefulness, because the decisions, the final decisions, the single country veto is enshrined in this existing framework, which, as you pointed out, as a legacy of the end of the Second World War, which does not reflect the power levers in this world. It consists of the victors of the Second World War, the United States, and then Britain, and then France, Russia, and China. So these five nations, each of them is given a veto, a single vote veto on anything. And then, of course, the rising influence of the Global South, for example, the Arab League, the African Union, the organizations representing South America, the African Union, they're not represented. And a lot of secondly, the global crisis allowed to fester until it's too late. And then when it's too late, then the members of the Security Council would each look after its own individual interests. And that, of course, creates a deadlock on any effective decision of the United Nations, because no country would be able to handle sometimes of these conflicts involve different great powers, and you need a mechanism to really draw in the Greek powers well in advance before the crisis comes to a boiling point. And so there's a lack of
right. There has been criticism that has been focused on how the United Nations has been functioning over the years, particularly in wake of the New World Order and the change of dynamics in the international relations. You rightly mentioned about how there is no proper representation of the Global South, which in fact is 2/3 of the population of the entire world. Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky also mentioned, said that United Nations is a weak forum now, and if it is not able to stop the war between Ukraine and Russia, there is likelihood of countries wanting to expand their territories by way of invasionary tactics. How do you have to respond to that?
Well, apart from the framework of the United Nations, because the United Nations just can't on its own solve the problems. For example, over Gaza, over Ukraine, and then the powers, the key levers of power themselves have got to get a good grasp of the situation. But the tragedy is that all the great powers, they want to push the envelope. For example, on Ukraine, only recently, President Trump was telling Zelensky in his face that Zelensky had no cards to play. And it was only about a couple of weeks ago. And all of a sudden, he said, well, Ukraine can recover all the territories and even more. More means even maybe even getting some Russian territories on the side of Ukraine. I mean, this is really crazy. So there's no way that, that Putin would agree to that.
Okay, all right. Andrew, thank you very much for joining us on the telecast and sharing your views. Moving on, according to sources from the White House, US President Donald Trump is expected to sign a TikTok deal on 25th of September with China. Reports indicate that the proposed structure of the deal complies with the bipartisan law passed in 2024, which sought to ban TikTok in America unless its US operations are sold to a US-based company. Earlier, President Trump held talks with the Chinese President Xi Jinping over a phone call and said that President Xi approved of the TikTok deal. However, there has been no confirmation from the Chinese side. The outline of the proposed deal includes that 6 out of 7 board members of the company will be American nationals, and the parent company, ByteDance, will not own more than 20% of the company. The US administration has cited security threats, particularly regarding user data privacy and algorithm issues. As a result, the deal includes provisions to retain and modify TikTok's algorithm with American user data to be stored in America on a cloud server managed by Oracle. This data storage and algorithm management will be outside the control of ByteDance. The deal has been reached after months of negotiations between US Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent and the Chinese Vice Premier. A Chinese official has earlier commented on a deal stating that they respect wishes of the enterprise and commercial negotiations with market rules. Andrew stays with me on the telecast. Andrew, interesting developments. It looks like the Chinese have now acceded to the demands of United States government, where the parent company ByteDance has agreed potentially to reduce its stake in its American operations. Right now, it's being widely speculated that US President Donald Trump will be holding meetings with Xi Jinping in the near future. But more importantly, a deal that is expected to be signed later today. What are the chances of that?
You're asking me, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, thank you. Well, of course, President Trump wants to wrap up the deal as quickly as possible because the TikTok is of huge importance to his young supporters, which help in a way to win the White House back. And of course, there's a lot of money in it, and all the Americans' greatest tech companies are salivating over the profits to be made by owning the American TikTok platform. But then the White House rhetoric, the White House readout, does not square on all fours with Beijing's narrative, because what is at stake is the intellectual property, the algorithms that empower the TikTok platform. And I think that Beijing's perspective still remains that Beijing doesn't want to relinquish and the entire big dance, the parent company of TikTok, its algorithms. I think the likely scenario is likely to be different but associated algorithms, specially created for the sale of the TikTok American operation to American consortium. and also allowing them to ring fence the data to meet the security concerns of the United States. Whereas ByteDance we still retain the original algorithms, which of course govern the TikTok platform, not outside the United States as well, because TikTok is not just in the United States, it has been proven extremely popular across the globe, including Europe, including Latin America, Africa, Asia, not least, of course, in China itself. So I think that there is still a bit of smoke and scream behind this rhetoric, but no doubt that President Trump wants to sign the deal as one of his wins.
Absolutely. Thank you, Andrew, for joining us on the telecast and sharing your views. Shifting our focus to the other big news. Denmark's defense minister has said that the recent drone flights over multiple Danish airports are part of a systematic operation by a professional actor. While authorities have no evidence linking the drone sightings to Russia, the minister warned that they expect to see more hybrid events in the times ahead. Denmark has reached out to NATO and the EU to discuss the situation. He also confirmed plans to reinforce Denmark's capability to detect and neutralize drones. Meanwhile, the Danish police has confirmed that unidentified drones were spotted over North Jutland are no longer in Aalborg Airport's airspace. Justice Minister Peter Hummelgaard has also commented, saying that the armed forces are working to acquire enhanced systems to both detect and bring down drones. Glenn Grant is on the telecast with me. Glenn, talking about this increase in the number of drone sightings, incursions that have happened. We saw that happening in Poland. It has happened in Denmark yesterday, and then Sweden and Norway as well. There is no way of verifying that, confirming that these drone incursions actually came from Russia. But what do you think, in terms of the speculation that it is likelihood that Russia has sent the drones to the territory, to the airspace that has caused for the flights to be suspended for a period of time?
I think the likelihood is somewhere between 99 and 100%, because I don't think anybody else would take that risk at the moment. And to just make one point, of course, we know that the drones that came into Poland were from Russia because they were tracked all the way across Ukraine before they actually went into Poland. So there's no argument about that. And I can't see that there can be really any argument about who else is doing this, because the only person that can benefit from this is Russia. I mean, we've all expected this. And in fact, anybody who didn't is foolish. And actually, it's a bit silly that the Danes start talking about, the police say this and police say that. This is a straightforward military activity, and it should be taken as such. And they know full well they need to get their act together and shoot them down, not allow it, because if they let this go by, more will come next time.
Right. Talking about the response that had been taken by NATO, there was an emergency NATO meeting that had been held after Poland was witness to these Russian drone incursions. NATO went ahead and said that this was not a deliberate attempt by Russia, wanting to downplay this entire event that had taken place just 2 weeks ago. Do you at this point of time are anticipating an all-out war between NATO and Russia in case this further escalates, and an attempt repeatedly being made by NATO to not escalate it any further?
Well, I mean, this is quite clearly an attempt by NATO not to do anything and to keep this as low-key as possible. And they will continue to do this probably until there's a total disaster. So I think, we almost got to say we've got to wait for a total disaster before NATO acts. And that means that there'll be lots more drones and lots more activity over lots more countries before finally someone actually takes the courage to say that enough. But you've heard individual countries say enough is enough. Poland has said enough is enough. And Germany certainly is now not in the mood to let these activities continue in the way that they have been.
Right. Glenn Grant, thank you very much for joining me on the telecast and sharing your perspective. Well, on that note, I slip into a short break. Thanks for watching NewsX World.